coming up tonight, we head off to Alcatraz. The Jewel of the Seas finally gets back going again as we sail under that Golden Gate Bridge once again. And Dennis does what Dennis does. It's all coming up, so let's set sail. Welcome to day number 6 of the cruise view, on board the Jewel of the Seas. Today was Wednesday, September 23rd, 2015, and we are continuing our journey down the U.S. West Coast as we took our second day in San Francisco. Yesterday we of course had very chilly, cloudy, cold conditions, mainly due to the high winds and the heavy cloud cover preventing any sunshine or warmth to really come through. Today was pretty much the exact opposite of yesterday. For our weather today, we had a sunrise early this morning at 6:58 a.m. and it once again came up over the Bay Bridge, giving everyone on the port side of the ship a beautiful sight to wake up to. And we had a sunset tonight at 7:09 p.m. As we're sailing out, it was starting to set right behind the Golden Gate Bridge as we sailed under her, and shortly after that it did finally set. And as for the conditions today, as I mentioned, it was complete opposite of yesterday. We had a listed high of 72 degrees today, and it's according to the compass we had partly cloudy conditions today, but pretty much all day we had clear blue skies. Everywhere you looked it was just clear skies and bright sunshine. That lasted until just before we departed, and then there was a little bit of cloud cover that came in, but not enough to really ruin the day. And in addition to those entirely clean blue skies, we also had little to no wind. Yesterday, of course, we had about 30 plus mile an hour winds coming across the ship, even though we're sitting in port. Today, there was pretty much no movement in the air at all. There was a very slight breeze coming in across the starboard side of the ship, and that was about it for the entire day, and it remained there all day, but not enough to really make it cold at all until we did depart. And then as soon as we got out and moving, of course there was a little breeze from the ship's movement, but when we crossed under that Golden Gate Bridge, the wind just really picked up and made it hard to stay out there without being a little bit cold or just getting blown around. But our schedule today, of course, being the second day, was to depart this evening, and we did have that departure scheduled for 5 p.m. At about 4 p.m. off on the port side, I'm not sure if they were anywhere else, but at least on the port side of the ship, 2 Coast Guard ships showed up. Not large ones, just small little ones that we often see in ports, and it's not unusual to see them show up for a ship when it's getting ready to depart or when it's arriving, just to make sure all things are going well, nobody's trying to get into the area or cause a problem. This one looked a little more unusual than in the past. We've seen it a lot, so you kind of get used to what looks normal, what doesn't. And these, when they showed up, looked a little more on guard to secure the area than we traditionally see. They were each pointed in opposite directions out, standing guard basically, making sure nobody came into the area, and they were on their guns ready to go at a moment's notice. And that on the guns, ready to go mentality seemed to continue all the way out of the port, as I'll mention in a moment. So we did have our 5 p.m. departure. We were a couple minutes late on that, ultimately leaving at about 5:10 p.m. Slowly backing out of Pier number 27, and then turning to head down past Alcatraz and of course Pier 39 and Fisherman's Wharf, all the great San Francisco sights down our port side, with Alcatraz over on the starboard side. And as we made our way nearing the Golden Gate Bridge, the Coast Guard boats remained alongside of our ship, patrolling the area, keeping everything secure, and one fishing boat, which seemed to be going pretty much in a straight line off on our port side headed towards us, was completely parallel to us was going to sail right by us, and the one Coast Guard ship did go and make a direct turn towards him and pretty much intercept him and take him off course away from the ship, which, in my opinion, he was nowhere near us. We've sailed much closer to other vessels in the past without an issue. I'm not sure why. It just seemed like they were a little more cautious and concerned about security this evening as we departed than we've seen in the past, and that could be a San Francisco thing. This is the first time here, or it could be some alert or notice that they got to be a little extra concerned in the ports right now. I'm not sure if anything else is really going on, but it was certainly noticeable that the Coast Guard was a little extra cautious and on guard this evening than they typically are. But we did make it to the Golden Gate Bridge at 5:42 to pass underneath, and of course from up on deck number 13 you have an incredible sight to see out across that whole Golden Gate Bridge with the ocean behind it and the sun still very high in the sky at that time, but starting to set and setting a few colors into the clouds, are really kind of wispy in that area at the time. And of course seeing it pass over top of the ship as we did head out into the ocean. And just like with many other days, nature did make another appearance this evening as we passed under the Golden Gate Bridge and headed to the ocean. A few whales did pop up to greet us, and some of them even swam alongside the ship for a period of time while everyone was at dinner, putting on a little show out the windows. So this whole voyage really has been nature's show, and that has continued today. Monterey, of course, tomorrow is known for its whales as well, so we'll see a few more show up there. But moving back to San Francisco today, of course, looking at what I did today, as I mentioned yesterday, we did go to Alcatraz, and we did our own. We did not do the Royal Caribbean excursion. It seems like all of Royal Caribbean's excursions are tied to a secondary excursion of some kind. So you can't just go to Alcatraz, see as much as you want, spend as much time as you want, and basically look around, see whatever you want to do, and then go on at your leisure. You're kind of tied into a specific time slot before you must leave to go on to that second part of your trip. So we did choose to do our own so that we could have the freedom to spend as much time as we wanted. And we booked the 8:45 ferry this morning, which is the first ferry of the day, so we're the first ones over there with completely empty island on our arrival. And they tell you on the tickets show about 30 minutes early. That is over at Pier number 33, which is just one pier over, essentially, right next to 2070. Of course, got 29 on that same piece of land, and then pretty much on the other side of the next pier is where you join the Alcatraz boats. So for us, we left our cabin at about 8 o'clock, and we're able to make it out of the ship and over to Pier 33 in roughly 15 minutes. So it was certainly a short walk, and one that did not take much time, even when you consider that included the entire time to get through the ship and off of the ship and through that terminal as well, which isn't the quickest process oftentimes. So our boat did leave at 8:45 this morning, and it took roughly 15 minutes. We got to Alcatraz and we're off the boat on the land at almost exactly 9 a.m. this morning. Alcatraz is not the first prison I've visited. There's also the Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, which offers tours to the public, and that one was sort of the baseline of information I had on prison system and the way they are going into this one. So I obviously made a lot of comparisons between those two as I went through. With the Alcatraz one, as soon as you get off the boat, it is part of the national park system, so the park rangers are the ones actually in charge, and they are the ones that are also running all the ferries, and the only ones allowed to run ferries and take guests to the island itself. That is why there's a limited number of slots each day, and it's important to book in advance because they are often sold out. So if you show up on a ship and want to do Alcatraz on your own, you may not be able to get a ticket if you did not purchase online in advance of your arrival. So when you get to the actual island, the first thing you do is you go out, and one of the park rangers has a little speech about how the island's laid out, where everything is, all the important details that you need to know about Alcatraz itself and what you're going to be doing for the rest of your time there, as well as, of course, how to get back to San Francisco. Following that, there is a short video that you can go and watch that gives you a little more information and background on the history and the timeline of Alcatraz and what has occurred there in the past, give you all the details of what the different areas are that you're going to be walking through, so you can sort of understand more about what happened when it was open versus now that it is more of a museum and national park. And then you can begin your journey through the island, walking up the huge hills to get to the top of the island where the cell block is located. Seeing all the historic buildings and sites and a lot of the remnants of the different time periods and different uses of the island throughout its history, including the short period where it was taken over by Native Americans wanting to claim it as their own island, which is a part of the history of the island that I personally have never heard of before, but was very visible throughout the island with different writings on walls in different places and a lot of different details that are still left over from that seemingly short time period in the history of the island, but was significant in shaping the direction of the country and, of course, shaping the history of Alcatraz itself. Once you get up to the cell block, you can then take the audio tour through the entire jail. And of course, when we did the Eastern State Penitentiary, there was also an audio tour. It was slightly different. Most of the audio tours that I've seen, you get a device that has a bunch of numbers on it, and you go around and you press the number for the item that you're at that moment, and it plays a short clip. And that's the information for that area, and then you move on to wherever the next number is. The Alcatraz one is a 45-minute audio tour, and it is a true 45-minute audio tour. You get to a starting point, you hit play, and it plays for 45 minutes. You then walk around. It will continuously tell you where to walk next, when to stop, where to look, completely pretty much control you, and you just do as you're told in the audio, and it will lead you throughout the prison for 45 minutes, giving you all sorts of information and playing all sorts of audio. So when you have the headsets on, you really don't hear what's going on around you, so they have a lot of different audio and prison sounds in the audio track to sort of give you that mood and atmosphere as well. And of course, the one downside is, since you are on a continuous 45 minutes, you can stop it, but it really disrupts the flow of things. It really is designed for you to go with a nice flow for that 45 minutes. And then afterwards, once we did get through all the different areas of the prison during the audio tour, we of course walked around the outside and saw whatever we wanted to see at our leisure and took a lot of pictures, of course, of San Francisco. And the Golden Gate Bridge, which you have great views of from Alcatraz since it's located directly in front of the Golden Gate Bridge as you are entering San Francisco Harbor. So in total, we spent about 3 hours and 15 minutes on Alcatraz itself. By about 12:15, we're done for the day and got back on the ferry to head back to San Francisco. till the ferry ultimately left and we got to San Francisco off the ferry. It was just before 1 p.m. that we actually got back onto the Jewel of the Seas to spend the rest of our day on board the ship, where there was not too many activities during the day, but a lot of things to see because, of course, as I mentioned yesterday, we are right in the heart of the harbor where everything is surrounding us. And for those wanting to get on and off the ship as they pleased, it was a very simplistic process, very efficient one, as everything the Jewel has done this sailing has been. They are not using the SeaPass scanners as they traditionally have been in the past. They're instead using a system similar to what you find at like a grocery store or any other retail place, where instead of sliding your SeaPass card in and out of the slot when you get on and off of the ship, they are using a handheld device. That it's not the iPhones or other devices we've seen used on other ships and in other locations, but it's simply a barcode reader that's connected to their little stations, and they're using that to scan the barcode on the back of the SeaPass cards, which means that when you have a line of people, they're just quickly going along, clicking on each card as the person walks by, and you really don't even have to stop. Everyone and the line just keeps on moving at a nice pace, and they just keep on clicking off on each SeaPass as it goes by and checking to make sure the person's information matches the actual person walking. So it's been incredibly fast actually getting through there, and that is something that I first saw them do in Astoria and wasn't sure if the system was broken or they're having an issue. There was some lines there because of the customs, so I wasn't sure if it was something to speed that process up, but we of course did see it yesterday in San Francisco as well as today, so it seems to be kind of their standard process, whether there's a big line or no line, just to keep things moving a little bit quicker, and it was certainly a noticeable efficiency upgrade. And what I'm not sure I've seen on any other ship and wonder if any other ship is currently doing, because it seems to work very well for them on here. So on board the ship, just like yesterday, there's not much during the day, but they of course did have the usual trivia activities that are held each day. When I got on board, I of course went to lunch, and as I mentioned, it was a beautiful day out, and that meant that for the first time this sailing, the back of the windjammer could be used. I actually sat all the way at the very back in the area that's similar to what the Quantum class has, that's completely exposed. And you had a beautiful view of the Golden Gate Bridge out the one side of the ship, Alcatraz, the Bay Bridge. You really see the entire harbor from back there, and in the sunshine and the very minimal cool breeze that was blowing, it was absolutely beautiful day to sit out there and take in the sights while eating lunch, and truly shows why it is great to see those open decks on the ships, because you can still see it all from inside the windjammer, but you just don't get that same feeling that you get when you're sitting outside. And then before we departed at 4:45 p.m. today, there was a top tier event held down on the helipad. I think I may have mentioned it yesterday, I'm not sure on that one, but it was part of the sail away party, so that I believe it was Diamond and Up members could go out on the helipad and watch us depart San Francisco and sail under the bridge. It was a little bit odd that they did that because the Jewel of the Seas, of course, has one of the better helipads that I've seen right up in the front. It's a very large one, and it's got a really nice, smooth surface to it. Some of the ones on the Voyager and the Freedom class have some edges and short, like 2-inch metal areas that run around different parts of the very bow of the ship for that short mast on the bow to retract in different areas. On the Jewel, it is almost entirely smooth, so there's really nowhere to trip. It is a very guest-friendly helipad compared to some of the others, and that does mean that it is one that many people use, and it is open almost all the time. So holding a top tier event isn't really as special as when they do hold them on the Oasis class. But it was a little more than just sail away. I did not go because, in my opinion, if you're sailing under a bridge, you want to be up on deck number 13, as high and as close to the bridge as you can get. If you're sailing in a normal port, then you're probably going to want to be down at that helipad. Today, of course, with the Golden Gate Bridge, that meant up high, so I did not attend this event. But from up there, we could hear it, and it sounded like Dennis was once again hosting it, and they were playing music and different games and activities down there to entertain the crowds. But of course, it was very windy, and that did affect some of the things they could do and the number of people that did come out for that. But it did look like a very large crowd down on that helipad at the front. Immediately following our sail away then was our dinner for the night, and it was a formal night, which once again makes absolutely no sense since we sailed away at 5 o'clock, got under the bridge at 5:45, and dinner started at 5:30. So if you're going to watch us sail away or go to that top tier event, you had to do it in full formal attire and then head off to dinner and be late for dinner because you were watching that. So it really made absolutely no sense that it was formal night, especially when our sea day was a casual day. And it's one of those things that I've been noticing more on recent sailings. I remember years ago it seemed like there was a connection to an early port departure, or more of a sightseeing port would have formal nights and smart casual nights and things like that, while a night where you're leaving just before dinner or you're at somewhere like Labadee and it's all beaches would have more of your casual nights. The past couple sailings, we haven't seen that, though. We've seen a lot of nights where I've questioned why it was formal or why it was casual, because the itinerary just seemed to not match it, and that's what we saw again this time with a port that had a late departure and a formal night, and then a sea day with a casual night the very next day. And once again we had a late, not really late, pretty much a normal time to depart today, but an important one that everyone wanted to see, and yet it was formal night, so everyone had to get back extra early to get ready. So hopefully they'll rethink it and start basing those off of the actual itinerary, because that will make a big difference, and that does affect how many people will participate in the actual dress code requirements. One of the things they can now take advantage of is the quantum class. You probably wouldn't think of the quantum class helping traditional dining, but they have tons of data where they can look at if a ship departs at 6 p.m., what time are people booking dinner at? If they're in this port, are they booking the Grand? Are they booking American Icon? Which restaurant are they booking? And get an idea of which days, what kind of itineraries, use that data to determine which ports of calls and departure times work best with which level of dress code requirement, the casual, smart casual, or formal, to really kind of tweak it so that it truly would work with the itineraries, and that data could really help them with it. So hopefully they'll look into that in the future and take advantage of some of that data, combine it with the itineraries, and come up with custom dress code schedules for the different sailings instead of what feels like a pretty stock one that just doesn't work a lot of the time. But as for dinner menu tonight, it was the shiitake menu, and for me that meant for a starter I got the hot Herrera soup. For my entree, of course, always going with the Italian items, I went with the conchiglione pasta, and for my dessert I went with traditional warm chocolate cake with some vanilla ice cream. And once again, immediately following dinner, there was another 7:15 p.m. activity in the Centrum. Tonight, it was an event called Putting on the Hits Game Show, one that I greatly underestimated. Looking at the past couple and a lot of the events they've had, there have been a lot of traditional trivia games. They really aren't that exciting to watch. They're rather boring unless you like trivia, because there have been a lot of music ones that were just like any of the other ones, but put in the Centrum and tried to make them bigger, but they were still the same simplistic, playing a song, and then in teams you write down what this song is and then checking the scores. We saw it again last night with the Michael Jackson game show. Tonight, though, was hosted by Dennis, and that, of course, meant it was completely different than anything you would expect. It's one thing that I've learned throughout this sailing, it's that Dennis knows how to do things right and take control of any scenario that he is put into. And this was the perfect scenario to really show him off, because he took what was a traditional trivia song game, and instead he pretty much filled that entire centrum with people watching as he rapid fire switched between songs, and instead of keeping scores or doing paper, he had people shouting out the song titles, the artists, and he was just throwing keychains left and right everywhere, just giving them out like they were water.
I just threw one in the water fountain. We are going to rock this ship.
And really got everybody excited and made it a very entertaining game, getting into the music, singing the songs, putting on dances, including a dance to Justin Bieber. So it was really an entertaining act that I don't think any other member of the activities staff, and I'm really not sure I can think of another cruise director that would have been able to take such a rather boring concept of a game that is always done and made it such an entertaining event that really brought the whole ship out. And that is one of the things we saw, since it wasn't progressive with scores, people could just show up, and that really seemed to work. That 7:15 time slot is not a good one, and we've seen that a lot. We saw it on the Quantum, we're seeing it again here. When a game starts at 7:15, they struggle to get people in. About 7:30, 7:45 until about 8:15, that centrum tends to be packed with people watching. So it's almost like they just started a little bit too early, that people aren't quite ready for their 8:30 dinner, they're not out of their shows, but it's a little bit overlapping with the end of dinner service for the elderly people, so they're not able to attend it either. So it looks like they shifted it just a little, they'd get a good crowd. And the other option is, of course, games like this, where you can show up at any point and participate and enjoy the experience without having to be there at the start. And it did work out very well. It was a very entertaining game, and a lot of people got into it. And of course, immediately following that, I went straight over to the Coral Theater for tonight's production show, which was another Royal Caribbean Singers and Dancers show titled City of Dreams. Kind of an appropriate title for leaving the city of San Francisco today. And just like traditional one, it was a lot of different songs with a bunch of singing and dancing. It had, the one thing that stood out really on this one to me was the number of backdrops they had. They had a lot of different set pieces in the background that came down for different appearances as they kind of moved around the world and performed a couple songs in each of the different cultures and styles of dance and music.
How wonderful life is. Now you're in the world. I'm calling all ages. With your light here in my arms.
And some of the sets were rather impressive, including one of a giant sailboat that they used fog and made it really, I think, stand out and look a lot nicer than a lot of what they've done. It really was something neat to see on that stage, because it did look very nice up there.
Set an open course for the virgin sea. Hear my head, sing to me this song.
And that ended about 9:30, which left about 45 minutes until the biggest game of any cruise, the Quest, took place on the opposite side of the ship on deck number 6 at the Safari Club. And typically, the Quest is a game that packs the place in. When it's been held in Studio B, every seat's been taken, standing room only in the back of the theater. On the last 2 sailings that were on the grandeur that it was on, It was standing room only by the time it started. People were sitting on the tables, the planners standing in the aisles. There's not an inch of room to move. Of course, Quantum did not have the Quest, but she does now operate it out of the Seaplex once each sailing, along with the Anthem of the Seas, of course. But on here, just like Grandeur, it is in a safari club, and tonight it was empty. Just like the Love and Marriage game show, that was surprisingly empty for being a crowd pleaser. Earlier in the week, this one was once again empty. It was at 10:15. Another late slot. I think the Love and Marriage game show was 11, so a bit later. 10:15 is kind of the traditional time slot for it. But I think a lot of people, it was just too late of a night. Tomorrow morning, we are in Monterey, and it's tendering. A lot of people's excursions are requiring them to meet to go for their excursions at 6:30, around that time. So I think a lot of people just turned in and didn't come out for it. So it was sadly a bit empty for a game of the Quest, but it was still a very active and energetic crowd. And of course, Dennis was in charge, which meant it was very different than the other ones. He always has his own little style that he adds to everything he does. And of course, we've seen a lot of games of the Quest. If you've sailed before, you've seen it multiple times, you know. There's a couple little tweaks that people do. Some put the little dance breaks, others don't. Some use the video screens, others don't. But it's traditionally always the same questions. It's rare that you see cruise directors change those questions up, but Dennis did that a lot today. He really tweaked the questions a little bit, came up with a new set, so it was a little more unexpected. You didn't really know what was going to come next. There were a lot of questions that kind of built on each other's. There was a quest for the males and then repeating it with the females, a lot of different things like that. So he really kind of made his own version of the quests, and of course, like all the stuff he does, it was entertaining. And for the first time this sailing, he was able to show his dirty side a little bit more, because of course the Quest is an adult-only game, and surprisingly, he has a very hilarious dirty side just as much as his entertainment side that we've been seeing all sailing. So once again, Dennis has shown that no matter what situation he's thrown into, he knows how to take charge of it and make it entertaining. He can make anything, it seems like, an entertaining event just by showing up and doing what he does. So that ended today's somewhat busy schedule. And of course, as I mentioned, tomorrow morning is Monterey. It is a tender port we'll be getting into. We're supposed to be arriving about 7 a.m. But as I mentioned, most people's excursion tickets tell them to meet in the theater earlier than that. And for people that don't have excursions, they are not able to get their tickets to take the tender boats over to land until, I believe, starting at 8:30 a.m. So tomorrow I'll, of course, review all those details, how things went, how the tendering operations went, and of course, what there is to see and do in Monterey. But that about does it for this edition of the Cruise View. Thanks for watching, and of course, stay tuned for the links and come back tomorrow.